Please leave a comment where you are watching from. Growing up, I lived in northeastern Arizona, literally about 5 miles south of the Navajo Reservation in Winslow. Naturally, being that close to the reservation, or the res, skinwalkers were a huge topic of conversation amongst the locals, and we all took it very seriously. Stories of personal experiences abounded. I was no different. Well, to start off my set of stories, I was about 9 or so. My family had gone camping in a little spot about 50 miles or so south of town called Heart Canyon, near Wiggins Crossing, if anyone is interested. We had been there all day, and I was extremely familiar with the area as we had camped there 20 or so times before. So my parents let me just wander about alone in the woods. This was back in the early 90s. Anyway, I had some G.I. Joes that I had been playing with in the nearby creek. About 80 yards from our campsite. There were not other campers there with us. My mom had called me back to camp for dinner, so I left and ate. Played around camp for a while, and realized that I'd forgotten my toys back at the creek. So I took a flashlight and headed back that way. I knew right where I had left them, so in no time I found them and grabbed them up. As I was squatted down to grab them on the edge of the water, a sudden urgency that I'd never felt before ran down my spine. I remember feeling frozen because of the fear. Like the little boy on E.T. when the alien comes out of the field for the first time, and he's trying to scream for his family. I looked up and pointed my flashlight to the other side of the creek, and about 10 yards down the way. I saw something. At first I thought it was a deer, but it was standing up, so I thought it may be a bear. But it was too skinny and not enough poofy hair. It skunked behind a tree and peered out slightly at me. I seriously was too scared to move. I had just read a bit about Bigfoot for the first time, since it wasn't really popular in my area. I thought for a long time that that's what I saw. I finally had seen enough to gather my wits and scram as fast as I could back to camp. I told my parents, and they kind of dismissed it as my imagination. So I just stayed close the rest of the trip. About 2 years later, I was at my house. I had 2 dogs. They were outside dogs, lived their whole lives in my backyard. One night they went psycho, barking at first at something in the alley behind my house, then they both started whimpering. I had my window open slightly, and one of my dogs straight up jumped up to the window, frantically chewed through the screen of the window, forced its way into the house, and would not leave the house for 3 days. Another time when I was about 13. We used to play night games in the town. Mostly, there being nothing much else to do, we would walk around our neighborhood and act suspicious, so the cops would come chase us around. And we run down the alleyways and hop into random folks' backyards to hide. Now, it was extremely common to see an intoxicated Navajo or Hopi in the alley, or the street. So it was no big deal to see one in the alley behind my house that night as we being 2 of my friends and myself, ran from a police car hot on our tail. We saw him plain as day standing in our way. We ran around him and jumped into the nearest yard to hide. We waited for the cop to pass us and hopped back out. Literally about 3 minutes went by. We ran back the way we came, and as we got to the point where the Indian had been, he was gone. Legit. In his place was a coyote sitting there watching us. We ran right past it, feet from it, and anyone who knows coyotes knows they will bail out way before you get close to them. This bugger held his ground and calmly sat and watched us run past him. We all freaked out and stayed inside for a month. My last experience was when I was about 15 or 16. My brother has a girlfriend that lived in a small community south of Winslow called Starlight Pines. About 25 miles-ish. Well, we went to go see her one day. And as we drove out, about 15 miles out, we saw an Indian guy standing on the side of the road. Which was quite odd because the res was north of town, and it was rare to see anyone on foot south of town, because it's just desert and forest for literally 80 miles. Anyway, we see this guy. He looked normal enough. Flannel shirt, jeans. We got to our destination and hung out with my brother's GF and her family well into the night when we decided to head back home. Hopped in his truck, a Chevy S10, and drove back the way we came. In the same spot we saw the Indian dude. He was still there. I remember thinking, that dude is crazy standing out there all day and into the night. What's he doing? Right as we passed him, we hear a loud bang on the back of the truck. At first I thought we hit an animal, but I hadn't felt anything that we'd run over. I turned around and looked out the back window. My brother started to slow down, thinking there may be something wrong with the truck. In the brake lights, I see the Indian guy chasing after us. We are easily going 55 to 60 at this point, as we were about to stop. The guy is in the road, feet behind us. I scream at my brother to not stop. Gun it, man. Gun it. He does, and being a Chevy S10, it had a speed governor on it at 80. 2 miles. 2 miles. This guy keeps up with us. We are seriously freaking out. I asked my brother, what if we don't make it back to town, or what about when we have to slow down once we get close? After those 2 miles that stretched forever, I looked back and he was gone. We got home, booked it into the house, and told our parents. Next morning, I get up to head somewhere and look at my brother's truck thinking about the night before. I wondered what the loud bang was just before we started getting chased. Inspecting the truck, I found a handprint smeared in the dust from about 2/3 over to the right, then smeared to the right taillight. I never went there again. First off, I would like to remind whoever is reading this that all these stories are 100% true and have happened to me personally, so there is no lying here. Also, I don't know why, but I feel almost compelled to tell my experiences, and I hope someone can relate to them or get a kick out of them. I have had run-ins with skinwalkers on 3 separate occasions. Let me tell you, they are not easy to talk about, let alone write about, because just thinking about it gets me scared again. So I will tell you about the first time I ever saw one, which happened to be the first time I even heard of one. First off, a little background about me. I live in Utah, and all the experiences happened while I was still living at home with my parents. I grew up about an hour outside of Salt Lake City in farming country, so I was raised on a farm. Growing up, I used to go hunting with my dad and brothers 4+ times a year. So between hunting, camping, and growing up on a farm, I know my animals. Now to start the story, it was 7 years ago in late October. I was 18 years old and my boyfriend, now husband, was 21. For the sake of being private, we will call him Rob, is half Spanish, half Irish. One thing to note about Rob is he is a pretty big boy. 6 feet tall, 260 pounds, football star. He lived all the way in Salt Lake, but he would still drive up every day after we both got off work to see me. He was a trooper. Well, one night he wasn't feeling too good, so he decided to take off a little earlier at 3 a.m. We walked out my back door, to the front of the house where his car was parked. The moment we walked out the back door, the smell consumed us. It smelled like rotten meat. Rob commented that the country air stunk more than usual. I remember thinking that maybe a cow had died earlier in the day, and we didn't know. But it smelled like it had been decomposing for weeks. When we got to his car, Rob threw this stuff in quick and got back out to give me one last hug goodbye. When something caught my eye, it looked like a skinny, bony dog that could barely walk. I remember thinking maybe it was a stray, and I was going to shoo it away. But the way its body was shaped made me think it was some sort of coyote, so I kept quiet. It was sniffing around in my neighbor's front yard, when all of a sudden it stopped dead in its tracks and stared directly at my boyfriend and I. Now this stare made the hair on my neck and arms stick straight up. It was like it wasn't just looking at me, but studying me almost. When all of a sudden, it stood up on 2 legs and hauled ass into the fields behind my neighbor's house. When it stood, it was very tall and gangly, but it stood so smoothly, and when it started to run you would think it was Usain Bolt. It was so fast, but oddly enough I never heard its feet hit the ground. I grabbed onto Rob, scared out of my damn mind. I turned to him, but he was still watching it run away in horror. I whispered to him, "What the fuck was that?" His face went pale and he replied to me, "Hurry and get your ass inside your house, lock the doors, shut your blinds, turn your lights off, and call me no questions asked." I started to sprint back into the backyard to the door, and when I got inside I did as he said. I got into my bedroom, which is in the front of the house, top floor. I peeked out my window, and Rob's car was already out of sight, so he must have burned some major rubber to get out of sight so quickly. I have never dialed his number fast enough. He answered asking if everything was okay, and making sure I was fine, and that I did everything he said. I again asked him what we had just seen. He told me he didn't want me freaking out, but eventually he gave up and explained to me what it was. It was definitely a skinwalker. He continued to tell me that he knew because he had seen one before, and was well informed on what they were because his Navajo friend was there the night he saw one for the first time too. His friend took Rob back to his house, and his grandmother explained to Rob the Navajo stories behind them, what they were, and she also cautioned both of them to not go near them, don't think about them, don't talk about them, etc. Needless to say, we were both scared out of our minds, and we started to hang out in the city in his house, rather than where I lived because it was such a bad experience. 7 years later, we are married now, and living in the city. We don't talk about what happened that night, unless it has to be talked about, and when we do we both get pretty frightened. I will post later about my other encounters, and maybe I will convince my husband to let me put his story on here. What do you guys think? Skinwalker? Man-bear-pig? LOL. This experience I am going to describe has taken a while for me to get together and actually write down. I have experienced a few paranormal things, but this is the craziest one of all of them. It takes place in Yosemite National Park in August of 2017, with my two best friends Zach and Andrew. Zach had worked that summer as a parking agent at Glacier Point and was pretty familiar with the area. His employee housing he was given was a house in Wawona with two other guys. Andrew and I were visiting for the week and had each been to Yosemite before. One of the nights there we decided to watch the sun set over Chilnwalna Falls. It was a great hike that Zach had done before. The trail was about 4 miles to the top with about a 2,000-foot elevation gain. We brought food and decided to hike up and take a swim and eat at the pools on top of the falls. We set out a couple hours before sunset. As we approached the top portion, we were about a half-mile to the top of the falls where a guy, about our age, early 20s, ran up to us from bushes frantically asking for help. His friend had fallen 50 feet off a cliff and had a shattered femur. Zach was used to this. After working in the park all summer, he had seen many injuries and was used to it. The man didn't have cell reception, but I did, so I called 911 and reported the accident, requesting search and rescue. After a few minutes, we decided we wanted to continue the hike after search and rescue assured us they would be there soon with a helicopter. We told the guy help was on its way, and we continued the next half-mile up to the top of the falls. When we got up there, it was a picture-perfect scene. A beautiful sunset as we swam and ate. We then got an amazing show as we saw the helicopter land to pick up the injured guy we just encountered, right below us. I'm a private pilot and Air Force aviator, so I loved every second of watching the helicopter land on the mountainside. After the sunset, we began the hike down, and passed the spot with the injured guy and search and rescue was taking care of him. We had a brief encounter with them. They thanked us for calling it in. It was now dark out, and we continued the hike down. There wasn't much moonlight. It was pretty dark, so we used our phones as flashlights to see the trail. This is where the story gets interesting. The top of the hike was switchbacks with a steep incline on the right, and a steep decline on the left with shrubs and trees. It was definitely too steep to hike down, hence the switchbacks. About 1 mile into the hike down, Zach was in front with a light, I was second also shining my light, and Andrew was in back. Zach was shining his light ahead, and saw something sticking out from behind a tree that was about 15 feet ahead, just off to the right of the path, and instinctively shined the light at it. That's when whatever it was exposed itself from the tree, and ran across the path, down to the left and down the steep grade. It ran on 2 feet, and resembled some sort of humanoid. It was a little shorter than us, and very clearly had 2 arms and 2 legs, but it moved in an inhuman way. It kinda resembled a person. It had a head and its limbs, but appeared to be just skin, no clothes on at all. We all 3 saw it, and stopped dead in our tracks. We continued shining the light to where it ran, down the left side of the mountain, but didn't see anything after it ran down. We were absolutely terrified, none of us really knowing what to say because we had no idea what we saw. The worst part was that we had another 3-mile hike down, and 1.5 miles from the trailhead to Zach's house, all while knowing that this creature could be stalking us and was near. Luckily, we made it to his house terrified and exhausted, but without harm. Whatever it was must have been just as scared of us as we were at it. My question is if anyone else has had a similar experience in that area. I've done some research, and my best guess would be a skinwalker, but it didn't try to lure us into the forest with it. We had a subsequent experience a couple years later, in Tioga Pass right outside of the Tioga gate of the park. We were camping in a closed campground in Tioga. In the middle of the night I woke up to piss, and before exiting the tent I saw an orb about 5 feet from the tent, floating across where a bright light. I don't think it was a person because Zach, Andrew, and I all saw the orb floating across and there wasn't anyone around us. Our friend Jackson was also in the tent, and in the morning told us he felt rocks getting thrown at the tent all night, along with hearing footsteps near all night. Does anyone have similar experiences? I'd love to hear them. We all know what we saw, and we know that it was not human. The first thing you notice out here is the quiet. Not the peaceful kind that lulls you to sleep, but the kind that sets your teeth on edge. The kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, like the forest itself is holding its breath. That's how it always is in the deeper parts of the Coconino National Forest. It's not a place for casual hikers or tourists. It's a place for people like me, hunters who know how to respect the land and its rules. That weekend, I took my son Will with me. He's 15, and I figured it was about time he learned the ropes. Hunting's been in our family for generations, and I wanted him to feel the same connection to the land that I do. We were after elk, big bull elk, to be exact. We'd tracked one for almost 3 hours that Saturday afternoon. It was a beauty too, massive antlers, a real prize. Will was excited, practically bouncing every time we spotted fresh tracks or scat. He's a good kid, but green. Too loud, too eager. I had to remind him more than once to keep his voice down, to step lightly. The sun was starting to dip below the trees when we decided to set up camp. We found a clearing near a narrow creek, tucked just enough into the woods to feel secluded. I showed Will how to pitch the tent, how to build a proper fire pit. By the time we had flames crackling, the forest was already deep in shadow, the sky a deep indigo. That's when we heard it. It started as a low, guttural sound, like a coyote but not quite. It echoed through the trees, distant but clear. Will froze, looking at me wide-eyed. "What was that?" he whispered. "Coyote," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. I'd heard coyotes plenty of times before, but this was different. It was deeper, almost wet-sounding, like something choking on its own voice. But I didn't want to scare him, so I kept my tone steady. The sound came again, closer this time. Will shifted uneasily on the log he was sitting on, glancing toward the dark wall of trees. "Dad, maybe we should pack up and—" "Relax," I said, cutting him off. "Probably just a coyote or a fox. They get curious sometimes. We've got the fire. They won't bother us." That seemed to calm him, at least for the moment. But I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my gut. I kept my rifle close, resting it against the log where I could grab it quickly if needed. As the night wore on, the forest seemed to grow even quieter. The usual sounds, crickets, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, were gone. It was just the crackle of the fire and the occasional pop of sap in the wood. Will had dozed off in his chair, his head tilted back, snoring softly. I sat there, staring into the flames, trying to convince myself that the strange calls were nothing to worry about. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, moving between the trees at the edge of the firelight. I thought it might be a deer, or maybe the elk we'd been tracking earlier. But as it stepped closer, I realized it was too tall, too upright. My hand tightened around the grip of my rifle, my heart thudding in my chest. "Will," I hissed, shaking his shoulder. He jerked awake, blinking groggily. "What is it?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Don't move," I whispered. The figure stepped closer, just enough for the firelight to catch it. At first glance, it looked like a man, but something was wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky, like a marionette being yanked by invisible strings. And its face. God, its face. It looked almost human, but the eyes were too large, too black, and its mouth was stretched into a grin that seemed to split its face in half. "Dad," Will whispered, his voice trembling. "Stay behind me," I said, raising the rifle. The thing tilted its head, like it was studying us. Then, in a voice that made my blood run cold, it spoke. "Will," it said, perfectly mimicking my voice. "Are you ready?" Will let out a strangled gasp, and I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't just the fact that it had spoken. It was the tone, the cadence. It was my voice, exactly. I didn't wait for it to come closer. I fired, the shot echoing through the trees like thunder. The thing let out a screech, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that didn't belong to anything natural. It dropped to all fours and bolted into the woods, its movements impossibly fast, almost a blur. "We're leaving," I said, my voice shaking as I grabbed Will by the arm and yanked him toward the tent. "But the gear." "Forget the gear," I snapped. "We're leaving now." We didn't bother packing. I threw the rifle over my shoulder, grabbed my flashlight, and we ran. Will stumbled a few times, but I kept dragging him forward, my ears straining for any sign of the thing following us. And then, from somewhere ahead of us, I heard my own voice again. "Will, are you ready?" It was closer this time, coming from the direction of our truck. My flashlight flickered, and for a terrifying moment, I thought it would go out completely. We broke through the tree line, and practically threw ourselves into the truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I saw it again, standing at the edge of the woods. Its eyes reflected the headlights, and that horrible grin was still plastered across its face. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I slammed my foot on the gas, and we tore down the dirt road, leaving the thing and our gear behind. We didn't talk much on the drive back to town. What could we say? Will stared out the window, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. I've hiked Yosemite more times than I can count. It's my escape, my refuge. The towering granite cliffs, the endless pines, the waterfalls crashing down into mist, I love it all. But that weekend, Yosemite made me feel small in a different way. Vulnerable. Hunted. Not what I ever experienced before. It was supposed to be a solo trip, just me and my backpack. I'd planned a 3-day route, starting along the Mist Trail and heading up toward the quieter backcountry around Merced Lake. It was late October, so the crowds had thinned, and the air had that crisp bite to it that comes before the first real snow. Perfect hiking weather. The first day went smoothly. I passed a few day hikers near Vernal and Nevada Falls, but didn't see another soul after that. By the time I made camp near the lake, the sun was already dipping behind the ridges, casting long shadows over the forest. I set up my tent, lit a small campfire, and ate a quick dinner of freeze-dried chili. As the stars came out, I leaned back against a log, breathing in the stillness. Then, just as I was about to turn in, I heard it. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the crackling of the fire. A whistle. Not a bird call or the wind through the trees, but a deliberate human whistle. Just 3 notes, repeated over and over. I froze, straining to hear. It came from somewhere up the trail I'd hiked earlier that day, maybe 100 yards away. I hadn't seen anyone else out here, and it was late, too late for someone to just now be wandering around in the dark. "Hello!" I called out, my voice breaking the silence like a rock thrown into still water. The whistle stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and the faint rustle of the trees. Then, just as I was starting to think I'd imagined it, the whistle came again. 3 notes, closer this time. I stood, my heart pounding. "Is someone out there?" I called. "Are you lost?" No response. Just the whistle, closer still. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trunks and undergrowth, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. The whistling stopped again, and the silence that followed was so thick it felt like the forest was holding its breath. I turned back toward my tent, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Probably just some idiot messing around, I muttered to myself. But even as I crawled into my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I didn't sleep much that night, every creak of a branch or rustle of leaves jolting me awake. The next morning, I packed up camp and pushed on, eager to put some distance between myself and whatever, or whoever, had been out there. The trail was steep and rocky, winding through dense forest and up toward a ridgeline that overlooked the valley. By noon, I'd reached a clearing with a stunning view of Half Dome in the distance. I stopped to catch my breath and eat a quick snack, the sun warm on my face. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 yards away, stood a figure. It was tall, hunched, its limbs too long and thin. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a tree branch or a shadow. But then it moved. It stepped forward, just enough for me to see it clearly. It was wearing clothes, torn, dirty clothes that barely clung to its thin frame. But its face was wrong. Pale, almost translucent, with eyes that were too large, too black. Its mouth hung open, and as I stared, it began to whistle. 3 notes, slow and deliberate. I stumbled back, my stomach twisting in terror. "What the hell?" I whispered, fumbling for the bear spray in my pack. The thing tilted its head, watching me with an almost curious expression. Then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into the trees. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I grabbed my pack and practically ran down the trail, my boots sliding on loose gravel as I tried to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. By the time I reached my next campsite, the sun was already sinking low, the shadows stretching long across the forest floor. I set up my tent in record time, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the poles. I didn't bother with a fire that night, didn't want to attract attention. I just crawled into my sleeping bag, clutching the bear spray like a lifeline, and waited for morning. But the night didn't pass quietly. Sometime around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. Slow, deliberate, crunching softly on the pine needles. My breath caught in my throat as I listened, every muscle in my body tense. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from just outside the thin nylon wall of my tent, I heard it. The whistle. 3 notes, so close it might as well have been inside the tent with me. I bit down on my hand, to keep from screaming, my mind racing. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. The footsteps started again, circling the tent, slow and deliberate. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric, the sound of something brushing against the tent walls. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The forest fell silent again, the kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and suffocating. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I packed up and started hiking, not even bothering to eat. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing, but I didn't see the figure again. When I finally made it back to the trailhead, I didn't look back. I climbed into my car, locked the doors, and drove straight home, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I've always hated driving at night, especially on long stretches of empty highway. There's something about the darkness pressing in on you, the way the headlights only illuminate a small slice of the road ahead, leaving everything else shrouded in black. But that night, I didn't have a choice. It was late November, and I was driving from Gallup to Farmington, New Mexico, along Route 491. They call it the Devil's Highway, though it used to be Route 666 before they changed the number years back. People say it's cursed, that strange things happen out here, but I've never been one to believe in that kind of thing. At least, I wasn't. I'd left Gallup later than I'd planned, and by the time I hit the stretch of highway that cuts through the Navajo Nation, it was already past midnight. My 6-year-old daughter, Elena, was asleep in the back seat, bundled up in her favorite pink blanket. She always hated these long drives, but I'd promised her a visit to Grandma's house, and kids don't forget promises like that. The road was empty, not another car in sight. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the occasional flicker of a road sign in the headlights. I was tired, my eyes heavy, but I didn't want to stop. Not out here. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But as I got closer, I realized it was a man, standing on the side of the road, just outside the beam of my headlights. He wasn't waving or signaling for help, just standing there, watching. I slowed down, my hands tightening on the wheel. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was guilt. What kind of person drives past someone stranded in the middle of nowhere? But as I got closer, something about him made my skin crawl. He was tall and thin, his clothes tattered and dusty, like he'd been walking for days. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were too dark, like they were just empty sockets. I hit the gas. The man didn't move. He just stood there, his head turning slowly to follow my car as I sped past. I kept driving, my heart pounding in my chest. It's just some guy, I told myself. Maybe he's drunk or high. Just forget about it. But I couldn't. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him still standing there, but the road behind me was empty. Just endless asphalt stretching back into the darkness. I shook it off and kept going. But about 10 minutes later, I saw something up ahead that made my stomach drop. It was him. The same man, standing on the side of the road, just like before. The same tattered clothes, the same hollow eyes. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me, not without a car. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, and I felt Elena stir in the back seat. "Mom," she mumbled sleepily. "It's okay, baby," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Go back to sleep." This time I didn't slow down. I kept my foot on the gas, my eyes locked on the road ahead. As I passed him, I didn't look. I couldn't. But Elena did. "Mom, there's a man outside," she said, her voice small and scared. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was sitting up now, clutching her blanket tightly. "It's just a hitchhiker, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Nothing to worry about." But she shook her head. "No, he's running, Mom. He's running next to the car." My stomach turned to ice. I pressed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring as the car sped down the highway. I didn't dare look out the window. I didn't want to see if she was right. For the next few miles, the road was empty again. No sign of the man, no sound but the tires on the asphalt and Elena's quiet breathing. I started to think maybe it was over, maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe it was just some crazy local messing with me. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Something darted across the road, just at the edge of the headlights. Too fast to be human, too big to be an animal. A split second later, there was a loud thump as something hit the back of the car. Elena screamed, and I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop in the middle of the highway. "Stay here," I said, my voice trembling as I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment. "Mom, don't!" Elena cried, but I forced a reassuring smile. "It's okay, baby. I just need to check." I stepped out of the car, the cold desert air biting at my skin. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the road behind me. The first thing I saw was the dent in the back of the car, like something heavy had slammed into it. But there was no sign of what had caused it. No blood, no fur, no broken glass. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from somewhere in the darkness. I swung the flashlight around, my pulse pounding in my ears. The beam landed on something crouched at the edge of the road. At first, I thought it was a coyote, but as it rose to its feet, I realized it was far too tall. Its limbs were too long, its movements too jerky. And its face was the same as the man I'd seen earlier. It smiled at me, its mouth stretching impossibly wide, and then it spoke. "Going somewhere, Maria?" It said my name in a voice that wasn't quite human. It sounded wrong, like two voices layered on top of each other, one deep and guttural, the other high and mocking. I dropped the flashlight and ran. I threw myself into the car, locking the doors and slamming the gas pedal to the floor. The thing didn't chase us, at least not that I could see. But as I sped down the highway, I could still hear its voice, echoing in my head. "Going somewhere, Maria?" It took me hours to calm Elena down, and even longer for my own hands to stop shaking. I didn't tell her what I saw. I told her it was just a coyote, that it was gone now, that we were safe. But I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. And I'll never drive Route 491 at night. Not ever. We thought it was just a story. That's the worst part. We were so sure the legends were nothing more than campfire tales, scary enough to make your skin crawl, but harmless in the end. After all, we were just a group of college kids, out in the woods for a weekend, trying to disconnect from exams, stress, and just the whole world. But by the time the weekend was over, I wished we had never come to the Smokies at all. And we never will again. It started on a Friday afternoon. There were 5 of us: Ben, the loudmouth who couldn't go 10 minutes without cracking a joke; Sarah, his girlfriend, who always rolled her eyes at him but secretly loved his antics; James, the quiet one who brought his camera everywhere; Liv, my best friend, and the one who convinced me to come in the first place; and me just trying to enjoy the trip without losing my nerve. We'd hiked about 5 miles into the Great Smoky Mountains, far enough that the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the crunch of leaves underfoot. Ben found a clearing near a stream and decided it was the perfect spot to set up camp. We pitched our tents, gathered firewood, and spent the evening roasting hot dogs and marshmallows over the fire. As the stars came out, Ben decided it was time for ghost stories. "All right, gather round, children," he said, grinning as he tossed another log onto the fire. "I've got a good one for you." Sarah groaned. "Is this going to be another one of your dumb stories about Bigfoot or aliens?" "Nope," Ben said, his grin widening. "This one's real. Or, real enough." He leaned forward, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "You ever heard of the Skinwalker?" I felt a chill crawl up my spine at the word, but I didn't say anything. Liv glanced at me, her expression uneasy, but she stayed quiet too. Ben launched into the story, his voice low and dramatic. He talked about an old Navajo legend, beings that could shape-shift, taking the form of animals or even people. He said they were witches, cursed to walk the earth as monsters. "They say if you hear your own voice calling to you in the woods, don't follow it," Ben said, his tone serious now. "Because it's not you. It's them. And if they get close enough to touch you, you're done for." "That's ridiculous," Sarah said, rolling her eyes. "We're in Tennessee. That's a Navajo legend. It's got nothing to do with us." Ben shrugged. "Maybe. But who's to say there aren't skinwalkers everywhere? I mean, look around. We're in the middle of nowhere. Who knows what's out there?" Liv shivered and pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "Can we talk about something else?" James, who had been fiddling with his camera, finally spoke up. "I think it's interesting. Legends like that don't come from nowhere. There's always some truth to them." Yeah, Sarah said, standing up and brushing off her jeans. "I'm going to bed before you guys creep me out even more." One by one, the others followed her to their tents, until it was just me and Liv left by the fire. "I hate stories like that," Liv said quietly, staring into the flames. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Me too." We didn't say much else before turning in for the night. I climbed into my sleeping bag, pulling it tight around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching us. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me, maybe the wind or the faint rustling of leaves outside my tent. But then I heard it. Liv. It was my voice. Liv, are you awake? Come here. My blood turned to ice. I turned my head toward Liv's tent, which was just a few feet away. The zipper was closed, and I could hear her soft, even breathing. She was still asleep. Liv, the voice said again, a little louder this time. It's me. Come here. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. The voice was coming from the woods. Liv, it called again, and this time, it was joined by another voice. Ben's voice. Sarah, come out here. I need help. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear the voices moving, circling the campsite. James, one of them said now, imitating Sarah's voice. James, where are you? I stayed as still as I could, barely breathing, as the voices grew louder. They didn't sound right, not exactly. There was something off about them, like they were being warped or stretched. A shadow passed outside my tent, and I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming. The silhouette was tall, too tall to be anyone in our group, and its limbs were all wrong, long and thin, bending at strange angles. The voices stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from right outside the tent, I heard a low, guttural whisper. I see you. I couldn't take it anymore. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, grabbed the flashlight from my pack, and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the clearing. At first, I didn't see anything, but then at the edge of the light I saw it. It was crouched low to the ground, its limbs impossibly long, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its face was a twisted mockery of human features, with eyes that glowed faintly in the firelight. And its mouth was open, wide enough to split its face in two. It stared at me for what felt like an eternity, and then it stood. I don't remember much after that. I ran, screaming, waking the others as I bolted into the woods. I don't know how far I ran before James caught up to me, grabbing my arm and shaking me until I snapped out of it. What happened? He asked, his voice shaking. I couldn't answer. I couldn't even speak.